This Choircast podcast is brought to you by How to Not Suck as a Christian. This book is a witty, no BS guide to unlearning the toxic parts of Christianity, like purity culture, apologetics, and the idea that God's love is limited to straight conservative Americans. It's sharp, it's irreverent, and it'll definitely make your fundamentalist aunt clutch her pearls. You can get the audiobook on Audible. Print and ebooks of How to Not Suck as a Christian are available to ship to your aunt wherever books are sold.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney and Bethany Shea.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Nat Turney. I am with my brother, John, and our lovely cohort, Bethany. As always, say hi, John.
Hi, John.
And Bethany.
Hi, guys.
Yeah, always the contrarian.
I don't know what to bring today.
You never played my reindeer games. I don't know. It's just
no.
It's one of the most endearing things about you. What's going to happen is one day we'll be like, months from now, you'll just shock the hell out of me and be like, "Hi, Bethany," and I won't know what to do. So, actually, it was really funny. We were sitting around the house this weekend, and George Burns. We were watching an old Disney film, and George Burns had voiced one of the characters. I said, "Oh, George Burns is in this." And my daughter, who's almost 30, said, "Who's George Burns?" And I just about collapsed in embarrassment. I said, "I have not raised you well." And I tried to explain George Burns. And then the only thing I could think of was Burns and Allen. I'm like, remember when he did the show with his wife and she would play, and she would say, "Good night, Gracie." And she didn't think it was funny. And I'm like, okay, fine. So I don't know why that has nothing to do with anything.
No, and I don't know who George Burns is either. So I know. You can kick me off the podcast. I can leave. It's fine.
I think to just go ahead and jump off this call. You don't remember actually, when I started to think about how much, he was a comedian, an older guy.
Okay.
Yeah, always had big glasses and smoked a cigar.
If he wasn't on Focus on the Family, I just don't know him.
Oh my God. You poor kid. Oh, Lord have mercy. You probably weren't allowed to watch his most famous movie, remember, because he did Oh God and Oh God Part 2.
Yeah, no.
Where he played God.
Sounds like a heresy.
There was a third one.
Tom Denver was in one of them.
Yeah. Oh God Book 2, and Oh God, You Devil.
Oh God, You Devil. I forgot about Oh God, You Devil. So one of my best friends, mom especially, thought that was the height of blasphemy. Just the title. It wasn't even the content of the movie. It was that, because we were always told that saying, "Oh my God," was taking the Lord's name in vain. And so, "Oh God" that was going to be a blasphemous movie. Of course, we watched it over and over again. And it was terrible. It's not a good movie. We have to work on Bethany's education.
Yeah, I'll just stick to The Life of Brian or something like that for blasphemy.
Well, that is my favorite kind of blasphemy and/or heresy, and actually hits a little too close to home on certain things. But we should have a whole episode on our favorite Monty Python movies and/or sketches. But
there you go.
That'd be wonderful. 2.5
minutes in. And by the way, the name of the podcast is This Is Not Church. If you're new here, this is what we do. If you're not new here, this comes as no surprise. This is a rather stream of consciousness sort of thing. And that's how we approach most things. But we have a great guest, as we always do. So let's get to stepping with that. We are happy to introduce to you Rikki West, who's the author of The Empty Bowl, Pursuing Truth in a Messy World, a former spiritual seeker and a UC Berkeley trained scientist. She spent decades trying to reconcile scientific explanations of existence with her ordinary real-life awareness. One adventure at a time, she found her way to a peace and beauty that changed all the questions. Her book, Rootlines, a memoir of family healing, was published by She Writes Press in 2020. Mother of Noli and godmother of Morgan, Rikki loves being outside in the alpine desert of northern New Mexico, where she lives with her wife, Jill, and that old Yamaha, which I'm assuming you'll explain. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. And hi, Bethany.
Hi, Rikki.
Somebody had to say it.
Perfect.
And that someone usually is Bethany.
It's usually me.
She's our resident. Well, someone was going to say it. And we're so glad to have you. If you wouldn't mind, we'd just like to kick things off talking about people's maybe spiritual journeys a little bit, and you can get as involved or as little, as much as you want. But we just wouldn't mind getting a little bit of background on you and go from there, if that's all right.
Yeah, Great. I was born to a Catholic family in a suburb of Chicago in 1951. And I lived in pretty much a Protestant town. There were like 2 churches. There were no synagogues or any other mosques or any other Quaker rooms or anything. So I was kind of unaware of there being anything but the God that was available to me in that Christianity, Catholic Christian realm. And my dad was a big drinker. He was a very successful comedy writer. People loved him. He was a beautiful, generous man when he wasn't drunk, and then he was really a bad guy. And I prayed all the time that he would stop drinking and that he wouldn't hurt our family. And I prayed all the time that God would not send him to hell, because I knew he was sinning and didn't really have a prayer. So nothing happened. My dad got worse, not better. And I don't know. I just, for me, I began to say, is anybody listening? Is there anybody really there? What's really going on? And I began a search. Well, my family moved to California, and it was the 1960s. So I took some LSD, and I did some meditation and transcendental meditation with the Beatles guru, that Maharishi Mahesh Yoga, and that kind of stuff. And then I got up to Berkeley, where I went to college, and studied science, studied genetics. I had a vision on an acid trip that the secret to consciousness was somehow in the molecule of DNA. And really, it had only been a decade or so since it had been discovered. It was that long ago, last century. So anyway, so I studied science at Berkeley, and I was like, the universe is made of these atoms, and they do this. Well, how do they produce consciousness? How do they produce feelings? Why isn't anybody talking? The psychology that I took at the time was based in behaviorism and was very mechanical, and there was no inner life available to me in that, university in those times. And yet I knew there was an inner life in me. I knew it, and somehow I was going to find it. And I looked everywhere outside. I did Zen, and I did yoga practices and meditation and chanting and fasting and many things. I did AA, in which I relied on a higher power for a long time. In each of these spiritual searches, something was incomplete for me. Something didn't answer the question, who am I and what should I be doing? And then one day I was with a spiritual friend who told me to drop the seeker. And I had one of those big flashes, just like a big story cracked open in my head. And if I could just try to make it really brief, drop the seeker meant to me that I was busy believing that I am just this limited character, persona, personality, opinions, feelings, thoughts, experiences, that I myself was merely that body-mind character and not something more. And when he told me drop the seeker, it meant drop that whole act, drop it. And if I let go of all that, what is left? No opinions. No, it's not feelings. I'm not my feelings. I'm not. What is left? And there's just the most beautiful, empty, peaceful awareness, in which my persona arises. It's not that God is in me. It's that I'm in God. And when that hit me, it changed all the questions, obviously. I'm really not worried about atoms and molecules anymore.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's so beautiful. There's a writer by the name of Sally McCaig, and she uses language of the womb-like love of God, the sense of that we are held in the womb of God. And they just kept seeing that when you were talking about, like, I am in God. And that was just It was beautiful. I noticed in the beginning pages of your book that just came out, or it hasn't come out yet?
Oh, may I hold it up?
Oh, please. That'd be lovely. Yes.
Here's the book.
The Empty Bowl. It is such a beautiful cover. Gorgeous.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes.
And yes, it came out in mid-January.
Oh, wonderful. I just noticed how like your story in the beginning pages of your story with marking you and your sister, and you're putting together this Christmas tree. And it's like there's this underlying anxiety that I could just sense under the surface. And even though it like you created this very idyllic situation and it felt very like at peace and restful, even, I don't know how you were able to capture that, like these words that were so peaceful, but at the same time, it felt like under the surface just bubbled this sense of anxiety. And I think oftentimes I know that you were feeling that later on. I realized that you were feeling that because of the unrest you felt with your father and his alcoholism and how that would create a lot of violence in your family. But I was just thinking about how much this sense of like, okay, if God is in us, and if I pray enough, if I say the rosary enough, if I do the right things, then there should be some sort of an effort shown, or some sort of fixed experience within my father. And that kind of pressure on a child, that you're responsible for your father's salvation, for your father's change of heart. That's very heavy.
Absolutely. I absolutely felt that way. And frankly, I still do. In my fantasies, I somehow imagine, of course, I do not know what happens when this body decays, but I'm pretty sure consciousness is some eternal thing, ongoing, non-stopping thing. And it just did this body for a while. But anyway, I imagine learning the truth so well that I could teach it to him, and going and finding him in some world and explaining the whole thing where he gets it and he's free.
Yeah. That to me is the essence of, again, not what's missing from the Christian story, but from how we've portrayed it. Because I still am enamored of the Christian story. I'm not enamored of much else affiliated with Christianity. But I think in its most mystical sense, we've flipped it. I think we flipped the script. And I don't know when this happened. Maybe it was Constantine and beyond. But we flipped the script from how do we immerse ourselves in this life of God, this massive ocean, if you will, of God, versus how do we get a little bit of that God inside of us? And that takes a hell of a lot more effort. It makes it more performative. And we have this ability then to have X's and O's to show when that works and doesn't work, and sets up this whole dichotomy, or this whole paradigm of how we can judge whether or not somebody else has it or doesn't, versus this other concept of whether we like it or not, we are in this ocean of God. And then how do we best experience that? Does that make any sense at all?
Well, yes, it makes me want to, Yes, I think you're saying there's one way we could approach this by seeing ourselves as immersed in God, and another way we could approach this as seeing God in ourselves. Did you say it kind of that way?
I mean, as though in one sense God is out there, and I'm somehow trying desperately to tap into some of that.
Yeah. Well, I just want to challenge that paradigm.
Yeah.
And I found in my life, I'm not a Christian. I'm not an expert on anything. I'm not a philosopher. In my life, I found that being a supplicant to a being that I imagined in my head or had been taught about left me always in a state of begging or trying to be good enough or trying something so that I could be accepted into the heart of Jesus or the heart of Buddha or whatever I was looking for. And drop the seeker meant drop being separate. Just forget about it. There's no separate person here. That's imaginary. It comes along with the package of having, daily experiences. But the only being here is God, and it is experiencing itself over there in you and down there in John. It's the order you're in on my screen. That's the only being. And what it meant to me is there is not a Rikki who has to make it, do something, get somewhere, learn something, achieve, drop something, be good enough. There is no being like that. There's just being, and a person through whom being can be present in the world. Something like that.
Yeah. No, I love that. That makes sense to me as someone who is also, I'm post-Christian, so I don't connect, like I did when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
A question I have for you, and it has to deal with your drinking and your alcoholism,
Mm-hmm.
is at some point you had to feel like you were a failure because you were trying so hard to cure, and it's in air quotes, cure your father.
Yeah.
And somehow you end up following into the same patterns, right?
What a surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I'm the only one. Yeah. Yes.
And so that steps you we could go into that story a little bit deeper if we want, but that steps you into AA. And I'm a recovering alcoholic as well. I'm 1 year sober.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Blessings.
Yay!
I have not stepped foot into an AA meeting, I think for similar reasons why you didn't want to step into an AA meeting.
Uh-huh.
I was just listening to another podcast that you were on, and I don't remember if I heard this there or you wrote it. You're going to have to correct me. You had a sponsor, and the sponsor let you borrow Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that story. If you could explain that a little bit, because that's an amazing story to me. And that's something that really rang true with me, because for me, AA doesn't seem like it would fit because it's so faith-based. And then you found someone who could help you through it.
Yes. So I really needed to quit drinking when I realized I was turning into my father. And that was a sad story with a bad ending. So it couldn't keep going. And I really needed help because I was kind of a broken person. So I needed stuff. And I went to this meeting and Patty grabbed me at that meeting. And she became my closest friend. She talked to me about her suicide attempts and her fights with police and getting to the psychiatric hospital and all the stuff. And we laughed about it. And then I started to tell the truth about my own life a little bit at a time. So Patty kept me sober and helped me segue into AA comfortably and feel safe. And so I trusted whatever she was doing. They told me in AA, find someone who's got what you want and do what they're doing. I knew I wasn't going to really believe in the Jesus that is presented in the dogmas of the faith that I had been exposed to. I knew that was never going to happen. But I knew I still felt a deep presence in me. I still was looking for it. And this was a way I could pretend. They told me to fake it till I could pretend that thing really cared about me and was looking out for me and would help me make decisions, even though I had felt abandoned by it over and over and over again. It was trusting Patty was how I could do it.
I thought that was an amazing story that she that you had no faith going in, and she loaned you or let you borrow her Jesus.
Yeah, yes, she just said, "Yeah, I'm sorry, but yeah, that's exactly what happened." She just said, "Just borrow mine." And
I love it.
Totally
I love that story.
Thank you. I want to say a little something. Maybe it's presumptuous of me to say anything about Jesus, but imagine that Jesus lives in every heart and every grass. And it couldn't be here if it wasn't happening in the heart of God.
No, I love that too.
I think it's the same thing I said.
I think you're right. Well, when I started exploring outside of Christianity and, for lack of a better term, deconstructing my faith, I leaned into something that Richard Rohr had once said. I'm not sure if he's in New Mexico as well. I think he's in Albuquerque. But Father Richard Rohr has said things often like, what we're lacking is not the presence of God. What we're lacking is an awareness. Because for him, being a mystic, sort of being of that Franciscan order, God is not another. God is not some separate being in a separate, some separate heaven, which we have done. I think, especially in evangelical Christianity, this particularly heinous, I think, iteration of Christianity sets up this elaborate obstacle course, starts you out with a problem it causes, tells you that you're broken before you took your first breath, and then sets you up for a lifetime of trying to somehow come to terms with that, and somehow trying to cross this obstacle course to somehow maybe hopefully attain the presence of God. And I think Richard Rohr and other mystics would say, well, that's asinine. So this idea that you just said that Jesus is in every heart, I fully believe that. If there is a Jesus, jury's still out.
Let me put it this way.
Go ahead.
Well, something is alive. Something is humming in you. Something is present. Something is aware. And we have different names for it from different cultures and traditions.
I agree, yeah.
But this is the thing I think was the big step that changed it all for me. That is who I am. That's not like different from me. So I hope if I, Rikki, get good enough that God will let me into it and let me rest in peace. It's already me. It is simply the confusion in my mind that has me think I'm a person with regrets and sorrows, instead of knowing, oh, I am it. Rikki is occurring here. Let everything unfold just as it is.
Well, there's such a beautiful sense of interdependence in that as well, because it does not allow us to disconnect from one another. How could we? I mean, we can try, but all those disconnections are superficial or artificial, right? I mean, you and I are just as connected to one another as I am to the cosmos, as John is to a blade of grass, as Bethany is to her family and the trees around her. This idea somehow of separateness. In fact, we start our podcast every week with a quote from a friend of ours who says, Christianity spent the last 2,000 years trying to convince everyone they're separated from God. And that's the lie of religion, is that you start from a place of separation and you try desperately to get back to some connection, versus, no, you started connected.
Yeah.
You will continue connected, even though your experiences might tell you otherwise or might indicate otherwise, that you might feel disconnected. I think Jesus on the cross, if we come back to that story for a moment, feels disconnected momentarily. I don't think there's ever a disconnection. But the larger story is how well we've let that lie pervade us to the fact where we do feel separate from everyone, except maybe somebody in our closely knit circles. And therefore what I do does not affect them, or that the choices I make maybe aren't as important. Is that something you have found, that as your vision of this expands, that you say, oh, wow, actually, we are not only connected, but we're responsible to one another?
I was at a protest this morning, and I felt a lot of anger. And, it verges on hate. And hate is what happens when you make someone an other and project stuff out there. I know that. And yet my anger is very real. So there's some way I'm looking for to stay present as being, open, empty being, in which my anger is occurring. It's not taking over all my brain and all my hormones. It's just occurring.
Yeah.
And may fuel appropriate responses in the environment. But if I let it come from Rikki, then feisty, angry little Rikki is going to punch somebody, because that's how I am. I'm just like kind of a little feisty. And you guys are all nodding, so you see the difference. It's hard to articulate, but
we get it 100%. John's a little feisty.
well, so that's kind of what I'm, working with now in terms of.
Well, that's tough because your anger. I mean, I sense that I have a lot of anger, and I'm trying to hold on to the righteous indignation, which I think is justified and warranted. Because I am angry. There are things happening right now that really, really, they scare me. They anger me. They scare me for my friends, not so much for me, and that's maybe why I feel even more earnestly about it, because this moment in history might not directly affect me or my livelihood. It will eventually, because we're all connected, and you can't possibly harm one of us without harming all of us eventually. But I see my friends in the LGBTQ community. I see my trans friends. I see my friends of color, and I see what's coming down the road. And it terrifies me for them, because I don't think it's just begun, whatever this thing is that's happening. And I'm angry, and I'm surrounded by people in this part of the world who are cheering it on, loving every minute of it, soaking up the othering that is happening. And so if you have any wisdom to impart there, how do we remain? Because I can't dismiss my own anger either. That doesn't make sense. It's part of me. And I don't think I'm out of line for being upset, but I don't want it to overtake. And I don't want it to get to a point where it has before. And I think it could again, where I see everybody who's in that camp, and now I can demonize, and I can, create caricatures of them as well. That's not healthy either, right? I mean, we have to find a balance.
Well, and anger usually tells us that something is wrong. It tells us that usually under the anger is sadness or grief, that things aren't the way that we wish they were. And I love how you said that, Rikki, how like the anger can easily get turned into othering people, into like seeing them as unworthy of life. And so when we get into that place, when the anger alchemizes into something that's actually, not good, like actually can unheal. I guess I don't know what the word is there. I'm blanking. But when that happens, we are then kind of creating those disconnections to happen. We aren't seeing the interconnectedness of the other person, or the way that we're meant to see that. So yeah, how do you create spaces of being able to see people that are causing that anger and that grief to happen within you, to see them as actual human, or actually to move into places where we're changing systems or changing policies or doing the work? And how do you not get too tired out?
Well, I may not be speaking right to your question, but one thing is that I've lived a long life in which I have done or thought so many bad things, so many things I regret, and I've been wrong about so many things so often. And the people that are destroying our democracy right now are trying to save something that they think is important. And they love their children. Okay? So I can't hate those people. What I see is the human race is really troubled, really, really troubled. And there's only a few of us who have been able to enjoy some peace somewhere inside. So many other people have taken on a false religion, a religion of hate or separation or hierarchy. I just feel like it's really, really important to be a channel of the great true being that is within us. And that, Jesus in the marketplace, in the temple. It is time for us to be extremely angry and to take action and to even be violent. No, let me not say violent, aggressive. I want to say to have aggressive energy about this. But it just really needs to stay connected to our deepest being. And I don't know how to, just 1 minute at a time, I just have to keep checking.
Just being able to say that the people on the other side love their children too. Sometimes that's about as all I can say. Trying to find something positive to say, because there's so much negative, there's so much vitriol, there's so much anger, it's interesting that a lot of people on, I want to say on the other side, look at us and say that we shouldn't be political, we should just stand back and be quiet and not be political. But Jesus was political, and for us to sit by and not respond in a way, for our LGBTQIA plus siblings or our BIPOC siblings, would be wrong. Would be absolutely wrong. We have to stand up. We have to say something. And like Nat said, in the long term, as a middle-aged white cisgender, there's not much that I'm going to lose myself, but I got to use my platform and I got to say what I need to say.
Absolutely. And you can be enraged. We just can't advocate harm to others. We can't let that slip.
No, I think you're 100% right. I think that's the tricky part. That's the tricky part. And and then the other side of that tricky part is when that hits close to home. And the hardest part for me, and we can go ahead and say what we're, I can say the harm that Trump has done to me in my life is the relationships that his existence in the political world has created in my family. It's one thing to argue with strangers on the internet. It's one thing to get mad at the guy across the hall. It has fractured and really harmed many of my closest relationships with my family because I'm having a hard time differentiating between somebody who cheerfully advocates for harm to people that I love, and somehow, and then these are the same people that raised me sometimes or influenced me in certain ways to love a Jesus who was all about justice and mercy and love and inclusion. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing those ideals just turned on their heads. I'm seeing them completely abdicate all of their responsibility in that area to reclaim some fictitious former greatness. And it breaks my heart.
They do it in the name of Jesus.
Yeah.
Which
and
is just
that's the blasphemy. Yeah. It is. We hit the same chord at the same moment. That's taking the name of God in vain. We'll bring it back full circle to George Burns. It's not saying, "Oh my God," which is what I used to get. My mom would threaten to wash my mouth. That was so because that was as simplistic and not to throw shade on my mom, who I love dearly, but that was the simplest explanation for us, was not to somehow utter the name of God in some vain way. That's just a trifle compared to using the name of God to harm people and to somehow claim that God is on your side. Bob Dylan's song rings true in my mind. Everybody thinks they have God on their side. I think Bob Dylan rings true much of the time. But the difficulty of this, and this is something we've talked about, I think it's come up half dozen times or more in the last year or so, as we saw the inevitable unfolding. Most of us were. I was a little pie in the sky naive. John and Bethany were a little more reserved in there. And now I'm like, oh no, I don't think it's going to happen. I held out hope, and then those hopes. But the hardest part is, and my dad doesn't listen to this podcast, so I can say it. It stressed mine and my dad's relationship for the entirety of Trump's first term in office, because I watched the same man that we fought tooth and nail when Clinton went through his fiasco, and the same man who swore to me up and down and lectured to me about how much character matters and how can you trust a man who would cheat on his wife? He'll cheat his country. All of those simplistic ideals were gone. And the current commander-in-chief at the time and our current commander-in-chief now had done 10 times worse since breakfast. And and it was just excuse after apology. And I'm like, so the hard part is separating that out and saying, okay, still a person I love, still a person who means a great deal to me. And this goes for, any number of friends. And I have felt very stifled in the part of the country I live, because I have to be very circumspect in the things that I say out loud, because they can backfire on me and my family and my business. And we're in very, very, very Trump country, man. And one errant Facebook post can cost you.
Well, you make me, this is the thing that I have found most harmful so far, I think, is that myself and most of my friends and some of my family no longer feel safe. We feel like whatever was the world around us that had some structure, even though it broke all the time and it leaked and the ceiling fell in, but there was some structure there, like it's gone. There's no rule of law. So I don't know what to count on. I don't know if our marriage rights will be taken away. I don't know if we'll be put on a list. I don't know if we'll be allowed to leave the country at some point. Should we leave now? I mean, I've never felt so upended. And I'm not alone. Everyone I know is in this. So now it really is us and them, because them is coming for us. And that is not where I hoped we'd be right now.
No, me either. Well, there was this sort of crescendo at one point, and I felt it. I felt this movement towards something that more looked like equality, that more looked like inclusion. I thought that when the Supreme Court ruled on marriage equality, I was overjoyed. Many of my evangelical friends, screamed and yelled that the sky was falling. And I was like, what's falling? Extending rights to everyone does not erode your rights. It just extends to them the same thing that you've enjoyed the entirety of our existence. And it turned out to be nothing cataclysmic. Shockingly enough, people began to accept that was the reality. And I felt optimistic, that, hey, we are slowly, way too slowly for the people who are living through it. But there was motion towards something that was better.
Me too.
And then it abruptly comes to a halt. And I don't know the extent of it. I'm like you. I don't know what the extent of that erosion will be. Will cooler heads prevail? Will somebody come in to check unchecked power? I pray to God. I hope so. But I don't have any assurance of that at all. I have not seen any true sign of anybody willing to stand up, especially in the man's own party, and say, actually, you've gone too far this time. So I'm nervous for you. We're nervous with you, if that matters at all. And we have to be vocal, John. You're right. We cannot afford. There's no such thing as apolitical in this time of history.
I was thinking today, we saw a couple of people who brought the American flag as their sign, and I was like, yeah, the American flag. Let's take it back.
Yeah.
Let's take it back and have it mean what it means.
Well, that's sad too. I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up, because that is sad, because unfortunately right now the American flag goes hand in hand with MAGA.
Yeah.
And to the point where I don't want to fly it, because I don't want anyone even remotely thinking that I'm connected with that part of the part with that party.
I know. And
it's sad. But it's amazing that, someone had the foresight to bring the American flag and say, no, we are Americans too.
Yeah.
And that's basically what we're saying.
What would it look like to see something like that as a form of resistance, like reclaiming the American flag as a form of resistance, or even, instead of trying to create bigger divisions, like, obviously, Rikki, you have a lot to be afraid of, more than the three of us on this podcast do, because of being gay and being older and being a vocal person and of yourself. You're somebody who has put yourself out there. And so it's different. I'm sure it feels very different for you than it would feel for the rest of us. But I feel like a form of resistance is not holding up or just being around people who think exactly like I think and affirm the beliefs that I have, because that makes me feel better for myself, but actually like trying to go across the aisle and to create those friendships, because the big bad guys that are in the White House and doing these things and making these policies, they don't represent me. They don't represent most of the United States. Most of the people who voted, they don't. And if we keep backing away and being in places where we might feel safest, and obviously everybody's in a different space, so whatever safe looks like, but sometimes we have to like push into those things as a form of resistance within a healthy community.
Yeah, those are really good ideas. And I'm just wondering, what if we, were able to like have an American flag with pink braid on it means you're in the resistance.
Yeah, there you go.
Something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
My wife and I travel in an RV And I had just mentioned I'd been on a 6-week trip. And so we stay in places that are a lot of right-wing people. And many of them would be Trump supporters. And it's just like a miracle that I didn't get mad at this guy, and I stayed in good cheer and had a friendly conversation with him. And I thought, whoever I was being at the moment that worked is who I need to be now.
Yeah.
We were in the hot tub. He started bitching about what Democrats do to water in California, and and I didn't argue with him. I just said, well, yeah, we've got a real water challenge. It's going to be pretty bad when the price of food goes up from the tariffs, and we're all relying on the Imperial Valley here, and there isn't enough water. And somehow, and then we just started talking about that. Like, we could agree that we shouldn't waste water. I don't know. He said a couple more heinous things that would normally have made me hate him. And I just didn't. I just saw him as another person who was worried about different issues than I was, and was kind of a jerk. Like, I'm kind of a jerk. Everybody's kind of a jerk. So what? Do we have to have a civil war over it?
God, let's hope not.
Maybe
Right.
Yeah.
There's this passage in the scriptures, which I'm sure you're familiar with, where Jesus is talking about heaping burning coals on a person's head. And that was something that, it sounds really dramatic and very unkind, but it was a way of producing fire for another person. Fire was not something easy to start. And so if you put the burning coals within the basket, the coal basket, and somebody would walk towards their place with it on their head, it was a form of hospitality. And it's almost like, the way I see that is this sense of like killing people with kindness in a way. Like, the only way that we can actually make any change is not to loudly portray or declare what we already believe. And they already know that we believe that. But what does it look like to actually move into places like this person in the hot tub? And in that moment, you were a person of peace instead of, and that took incredible strength for you to be able to be in that state. And yet it just flowed out of you naturally in a way. And that was something, for him, for that man, he probably experienced a different side of somebody he would have never had a conversation with any other time.
Because I did let them know I was a lesbian. I made sure to say my wife Jill 3 times, just.
Good job.
We're a little tone deaf, though. It takes most of us white straight dudes 3 or 4 times before we go, well, hold on. No, she misspoke. She didn't mean that. You're what? What? And I can tell you from, and I think John would attest to this. I'm sure Bethany would too. I won't speak for either of them. But my thinking on this stuff shifted the minute I started meeting people, the minute I started actually having more than a superficial conversation with somebody. And as soon as I could begin to realize that the stereotypes were just that the caricatures were empty. And I think I'm an honest enough person to say, well, I can't dislike that person simply based on this one thing. Maybe there's more to it. And so it caused a real crisis of faith in me because, again, John and I both come from very evangelical Christian upbringings where there was no question where we stood on this issue. And it took time for me to get there. It never took time for me to love people. I don't think I've ever had an issue. And I don't ever think I was overtly judgmental. But that's sometimes the more dangerous kind where you can pat yourself on the back and say, oh, no, I love everybody, but still deep in your heart, you hold some prejudices. But those only come down. I've never seen anybody convinced through being criticized and yelled at. I've never seen anybody convinced at a protest. Everyone already knows where they stand at a protest. It doesn't mean that protesting is not important, but I'm telling you, the one-on-one relationships that began to infiltrate my life, and John had this very fortunate experience to have that introduction as a teenager, and just through his involvement with theater and I was much later to the party, but isn't that thing? It's like once you see certain things, you can't unsee those things. And I'm wondering if there's a way to turn that dichotomy. I keep using the word dichotomy. That's not the word I'm looking for. To turn that thing on its head, though, and say, okay, well, when I look at the X person that I think is this way, relationships can possibly break down those caricatures and invite some understanding. But that's a slow burn. That takes a little while. I mean,
well, let me add something to here that I think has happened for me is humility.
yeah.
It really helps to see a lot of the positions that I had that I thought were righteous. I see they were ineffective and perhaps sometimes inhumane. And perhaps I shouldn't have jumped to the gun about my humanitarian principles being the foundation for certain choices and decisions. I'm questioning all these things on a really different level. And it's making me really have, humble pie. And that makes me a little less judgmental because, I can't just really go, I'm carrying the white cross and you're carrying the double skull.
Even though it might well be true.
But it might not. They're crying out for something. And, especially the ones who think they found Jesus and have found some other really dark vein of emotion in themselves.
Yeah.
They're crying out for help. The whole human race is just crying out for something. And now it's so ugly right now because the reaction to all the pain on the planet is to try to get dominance and protect your clan. But we're in so much pain, everybody. Even the people I almost hate.
No, I think you're right. I'm very interested, and I know this isn't the focal point of your book, but I'm still very interested in your science background too. I'm very fascinated by that. How does that play? Because it must have been something to be in on some of the ground floor of some of the study as it was just emerging. We all take genetics and DNA for granted, but there was a time when that was. I mean, Charles Darwin wrote his book before the concept of DNA was even a thing, and it turns out he was largely right. DNA and genetics and things really proved a lot of what he had theorized to be correct. But what was that like to come from a sort of Christian background to come to the world of science and have everything be evidentiary and have everything be, science-based versus faith?
I think I got fascinated with physiology in high school. It just knocked my shoes off. There's this little pipe that goes to this little organ that processes these chemicals and goes here, and there's 7 different systems, and they all interact. And I just got like, wow, maybe that will tell me what we are, who we are, if I could understand that. So, so I just majored in science in high school and finished all that. And then I just Berkeley was the place. I mean, it was the natural place to want to be in 1968. So, of course I had to go there, but,
of course.
But they had great science department and the molecular biology was like leading the world in the understanding of the genetics. And we had such clumsy lab stuff, like we would take Drosophila and crush them up and spin the parts down and try to isolate the DNA and spread the chromosomes out. We on a pad, look at them under the microscope, and it was so primitive. Now you just get an AI to figure it out, and you don't need any.
There you go.
Well, then obviously the Human Genome Project comes along and just blows that all up and shows us.
Yeah.
Okay, well here is what we've theorized for so long. And I think we'll look back on the Human Genome Project at some point and just realize what a watershed moment that was for science and for humanity. But the idea of genetics and physiology and evolution and all those things that were at one point so divergent from my Christian upbringing have now come full circle. And I'm like, well, this is actually all very, I know many atheists believe in evolution and vice versa, but in my sort of, patchwork way of thinking of things, they're not mutually exclusive. You can have these processes that function and not rule out the divine, whatever that is. Again, I like I think I lean more towards your definition than others at the moment. But I like that convergence of those things that says, okay, here is this, ridiculously complex system, but we can understand it. If we break it down into its into its different
Yes.
parts. We see
Yes.
this, and we look under a microscope, and we suddenly see, oh, that's what RNA does, and this is how it functions. And I'm just fascinated by all of that. So I think that's a neat.
Me too.
And I think it's an awesome component to bring into your story, to say, hey, this is, a more holistic worldview where we don't eschew education. We embrace that. That's one pathway to truth. It's not the only pathway to truth, though. But I think oftentimes
it's a pathway to a limited truth.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
In my experience, it did not help me find the inner meaning of my life. It's fascinating, but the inner why am I alive and what am I here to do has come from discovering I am being rather than a being or a person. And in a way, the way I kind of imagine it is like God is some kind of big, empty, amorphous space, and then it kind of bubbles here, and it makes a universe with protons and electrons set at exactly these frequencies, and then that just keeps evolving within God's space, within God's mind, until it creates organisms that can look and say, "Oh, I'm aware. I can see myself here. I can know myself through my senses, one tiny aspect of myself." That's kind of how I look at it. Of course, God probably doesn't need to do that for entertainment, but
probably not. But I just find that to be such a compelling story, and I don't know how I conceive of God at the moment. But one way I do is if the Big Bang happened the way the scientists postulate. Here's my place recently. I've been researching and reading quite a bit, but essentially most scientists will say that there was never nothing. Most scientists will not say, the Big Bang is not the universe expanded from nothing. This is not creation ex nihilo. This is
right,
the universe
right.
condensed into one hot dense. Anyway.
Yeah, or we came from another black hole in another universe.
Sure, and there's several ideas that this has been happening on some level for billions and billions of years. The universes have been expanding and contracting, expanding, and that's how maybe our universe will end. Not the Big Bang, but the Big Crunch, right? But they will almost reluctantly admit when pressed, okay, well, where did all of that come from? Well, as far as we know, it's always been here. This is the only eternal thing that we have any evidence of. That's not to say it is eternal, but we don't have any evidence to say that it's not, because we don't know where it came from. And in my brain, that could very well be God. The very ground of existence, the very foundation of existence completely, does not mean that God necessarily is interpersonal, interacts with us and, controls things. But I'm cool with that, and within inside of that system, there's all these processes that can then be allowed to operate. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm rambling now, but this seems like a good idea.
Where else could the universe possibly exist? Where would it occur? What exists that it could go exist in besides the one being? Well, how could it be separate? It has to be made of the one being. And maybe it's all a trick of the eye, to create a human mind that has 5 senses and to make us feel like we're here as people. But of course, it's all happening in I just want to say the consciousness, the awareness, the being of God, something like that, because there's nowhere else for it to happen.
It's the only universe we've got. It's the only one we've got. It's the only one we can observe.
Yeah.
Why not? And it's massive, so it still fits the criteria, because God is big. Well, the universe is big. And are there other universes? I don't know, probably. But we only know of this one, and it's the only one we can even remotely explore and look into. But I don't know, I'm fascinated by that. I think it dovetails nicely with your view of the cosmos and our place in it, if we are simply immersed in it and part of it, which means, we're all part of it and we're all part of one another. I don't know. I like that. Bethany, you had something to say. I think I cut you off.
Oh, I don't know if I really did, but I will say something. Oftentimes in my upbringing, I would hear that people who choose not to accept God in the Judeo-Christian Orthodox version of who God is full of pride. It is their pride that keeps them from accepting God into their life. And from this conversation and from my own experience over the years, I believe that it is a source of pride to accept God in that sort of a way. It is deep humility to throw our hands into the air and say, I don't know, but even in my unknowing, I know that I'm a part of something. There is a ground of being. I am included into this vastness of God or love or this energy of goodness in the world that connects each human being together beyond anything that we can quite figure out in a laboratory or within a scientific equation. It is something that's unexplainable. And I don't believe that's pride. I believe that that's an invitation into grace and humility, this acceptance. So I really appreciated our conversation today. It was incredibly enlightening.
Absolutely. Yeah. I could not have said that better, Bethany. In fact, you've sparked ideas. I love that. Because there is almost nothing more prideful than I know who God is. I've figured it out. By the way, I'm right. And the rest of you are wrong.
Yeah.
Those are some of the most prideful people I know. The people who are the most certain. And the more that I have conversations like this with people, I find out that this uncertainty is not a bad thing. It is the very thing that keeps that humility and curiosity alive in us to say, because that's the one thing that certainty and stridency kill. Well, I'm no longer curious because I know, and I don't need to know anymore because I know enough. Well, I pray I never become incurious. I want to be learning for the rest of my life. And if that means I have to unlearn some things, then so be it. Then we need to unlearn some things. But I love that about you, Rikki. I love that about your story. And we didn't touch the surface. We did. If you're still here and you're listening, you need to read the book, both books. Any other book that she writes, I would read, recommend. Matter of fact, buy multiple copies and share with friends. Because I think, again, we just scratched the surface of your story, and I think it's an amazing one, and it's an important one that needs to be told. But I'm just so thankful that you took the time to hang out with us and share a little bit of that with us.
Yeah, really.
I had a great time talking to you guys. I'm going to listen to your podcast.
We are so fortunate. John has done such a tremendous job. And yes, I'm tooting your horn, John, because the people that we get to interview are some of the most, it's just a wide variety of folks. Very, 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 very smart people, always. But everyone from academics to activists to authors and politicians. And it's sometimes intimidating, talking to a Yale Divinity graduate and going, well, I don't know how much I have to say about this. But you are no exception to that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Speaking with you has been a great joy. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate talking to you guys too.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.